Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to day 176 of Humanity Rising. Humanity Rising is an initiative of Ubiquity University and over 300 partnering organizations from all over the world that have come together during this extraordinary pandemic we're all experiencing and have offered a daily opportunity, a sacred space, a global commons, if you will, so that people worldwide can come together in community on the virtual platform of Zoom to share their experiences, their ideas, their solutions, their visions and hopes for a better world. It's been a year since the pandemic started in China in January of 2020. We're now moving into February 2021. The pandemic is still with us and becoming more acute in some areas, less acute in others. Vaccinations are being deployed in different forms by different companies in different ways around the world. But it's still unclear how long the pandemic will be with us and what it's going to take to really galvanize the human race at a moment when scientists are telling us we're literally running out of time to rectify our relationship, not only with each other, but with the larger eco field, or else we may lose the world as we know it. And the pandemic, a little tiny virus, has done more to stop our world, challenge our assumptions, compel us into new thinking than anything that we've collectively experienced for a very, very long time. It's very clear that we're being addressed by nature herself to reimagine who we are as human beings on this beautiful, beautiful blue dot floating in space. If you remember those lines from the astronomer Carl Sagan. Let us begin, as we always do, by taking a few deep breaths and closing our eyes and placing our attention on our heart. See if you can listen to your heartbeat. And in a spirit of gratitude and thanksgiving that you're alive. We're all alive at this critical moment. Let us commune through our hearts with all the beating hearts of those around us. Thank you, everyone. Now, with an open heart and with a heart full of gratitude for all of you who've joined our session today on Humanity Rising, I want to commence our program on conscious evolution by making a comment on how challenging that is. And I would like to refer to recent events in the United States as an example of the challenge to become conscious about our evolutionary development. As all of you know, we had an election last November in which record numbers of Americans went to the polls, and in one of the most fair and transparent and honest elections in our history, where over 160 million people voted. The President of the United States refused to concede and articulated more fervently than ever what is essentially a big lie, that the election was fraudulent. There were court cases, and out of over 60 court cases at the local level, at the state level, all the way up to the Supreme Court of the United States, every court ruled in favor of the elections and against Donald Trump. And yet he persisted. And on January 6th, when the Congress of the United States, the Senate and the House of Representatives, were meeting in session in the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., he had a rally and unleashed a gang of thugs on the Capitol building in an insurrection, an attempt to overthrow the duly elected members of Congress, to assassinate Mike Pence, the vice president, to assassinate Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, and other high-ranking government officials. When it was over, 5 people were dead. The temple of democracy in the United States had been desecrated, including with feces on the walls, on the murals. And the desecration was on global television live. The Democrats moved quickly to impeach Donald Trump for incitement to insurrection. And we all thought there was going to be a fundamental change of consciousness in the United States, in the polity of one of the most committed nations in history to the principle of democratic governance, that after this assault, that we would part ways with Donald Trump, convict him, and move on. And that is not what happened. That is not what happened. The Republican Party quickly consolidated around Trump. The big lie continued by key senators and members of the House. QAnon full of conspiracy theories, has essentially taken over the Republican Party. And Fox News and the alt-right media. And we're now facing in the United States a virulence, a toxicity that is getting deeper, and it's manifested itself through vaccination programs. There are now violent protests against facilities that are beginning to bring out the vaccinations, and it's the same mentality. And I think it's worth just noting, just stepping back for a moment. If you go back thousands of years to Zoroaster, who articulated really the initial religious spirituality that informed the Abrahamic religions, he said that there's a cosmic battle between good and evil. And the opposite of the light, at the heart of the darkness, is what he called the lie. The lie. That Luciferian energy, the dark side of the force. We're grappling with it mightily here in the United States. We're grappling with the lie. Those of you who remember your history of World War II, it was Hitler and Goebbels' mastery of the big lie that gave them such extraordinary power over the entire German nation, such that all of Germany followed Hitler off the cliff into the conflagration of war and Holocaust and self-destruction. Einstein said, as it's been often repeated here on Humanity Rising, that the consciousness that produced the problem can't solve the problem. And that is the central predicament of humanity today. And not only in the United States, but all over the world, you see us grappling with our inability, even if we can name the lie, to transform it, to integrate it into a higher level of consciousness. So as Ken Wilber says, we transcend and include. Why is that so difficult? And an entire nation that has been a light to the world for centuries may go down in the gulf of civil strife and civil war simply because we cannot expel the lie. We'll be talking more about this during the trial coming up, but I wanted to just name it, everyone, for our ongoing edification as Humanity Rising and all of us struggle with how do we, under current circumstances, how do we act? What do we say? How do we think in such a way that we can bring light to the lie that is binding us with such oppressiveness all around the world? And to such an extent, as you know from the World Wildlife Fund, that over the last 50 years, we've basically decimated 69% of the biodiversity of planet Earth. And we're accelerating that as we speak. So the subject today is not an academic question. It's a matter of real urgency. And I'm delighted to be able to introduce you to Amanda Scott. She's a veterinarian surgeon. She is also an award-winning author. She's written a brilliant book on Boudica. You may know from your history, Boudica was a British queen in the pre-Roman times. She wrote a book, Boudica Dreaming. She has a podcast called Accidental Gods, and we've become acquainted through Humanity Rising. And she's passionate around this question of how do we activate in ourselves, individually and collectively, a consciousness about the evolution in which we're engaging. So Manda, I want to welcome you to Humanity Rising, and I turn the program over to you.
Thank you. Over to me, and this is River, one of the cats who always comes to help when I'm on Zoom. I don't know why, but if I lock him out, it's much worse. So thank you, Jim. Thank you for the invitation to this. It's such an honor to be part of this extraordinary project that in and of itself, I think, is changing the way that consciousness arises in the moment on this planet. And when I looked at the programming, this was going to be after a day on Indigenous wisdom, which I thought was going to be really very clever programming on Jim's part. And then the snow came, and it turned out that instead, yesterday we had Leslie Southwick Trask, I hope I'm saying that right, which actually was the perfect lead-in to this. Her talking about fierce love and the being present in the moment, and the quantum present being the thing that matters, was absolutely the best lead-in we could have. So I am going to share my screen, and I sincerely hope that it doesn't crash. I have cleared my computer of everything else. Here we go. All right, so far so good. I am going to endeavour to put this on full screen, and we're going to see what happens. Richard does have a set of slides if this all goes horribly wrong. So welcome everybody to Conscious Evolution. Yes, it worked. Okay, we're on a roll. Right, so a lot of you will know the basics of this, but I just want to go through what conscious evolution is and why it's important, and then spend the bulk of the time looking at how do we get there, because clearly that's the most important thing. And before we get there, I had this right at the end, and I thought it might end up getting cut off, so I've moved it to the beginning. That's the value of key point. I'm assuming you all know what the technological singularity is, but just in case not, the singularity of any exponential curves, that's what in America you call a hockey stick curve. The point where it goes vertical with respect to the x-axis is called the singularity, whatever that curve is. Population of lemmings, population of humans, technology on the planet as we see it. At the point when you reach the singularity, acceleration is so fast with respect to time, where the y-axis is degree of technological advancement and the x-axis is time, that effectively we are moving much, much, much faster than the human psyche can envelop. And partly this is due to the fact that we have, I listened to Tristan Harris the other day, and he was saying, we have the firmware that was installed in us in the Paleolithic times. Our firmware as human beings has not really changed a lot since then. So we have Paleolithic emotions embedded in medieval institutions, which speaks a lot to what Jim was just talking about. And we have the technology of gods, and it's accelerating. And those three together, Paleolithic emotional state, medieval institutions, technology that is accelerating faster than we can possibly keep a handle on, are the reason we are where we are. My definition of the technological singularity is that when we create a chip, a silicon chip, let's just call it a silicon intelligence, we could say, that has the capacity to design and build its own successor, then we, humanity, are redundant in the evolution of intelligence. And I think there's a lot of people go, well, you know, we will never design a chip that could compose like Mozart, or paint like Picasso or even create the politics of our time, and we don't have to. That's all completely irrelevant. All we have to do is design and build the chip that can design and build its own successor, and we are redundant in the evolution of intelligence. However, it is my contention even, and part of the reason why I am so immersed in trying to promote conscious evolution, that we are not at that point redundant in the evolution of consciousness. I think that's a really important distinction, particularly with a view to things that have arisen even in the last couple of days since I made these slides. So I want to explore the ways by which we may still maintain relevance on planet Earth. Because one of the things underpinning this, we'll do a little bit of my past history in due course. I used to be a veterinary surgeon, then I became a novelist. I am now a podcaster, and I run something called Accidental Cause, which is endeavouring to help us all reach conscious evolution. And at the points when I hit the sense of catastrophe that hits all of us at some point, I remember that everyone who's ever had a near-death experience and come back, to a woman and a man, says, everything is going fine, stop worrying, it's all going exactly as it needs to go. And that does really weird things to my head, because I think, have you seen the world recently? Do you know that we're in the middle of the 6th mass extinction? And this is the first time that we have species level capacity to actually wipe out life on Earth effortlessly. Are you aware of that? And the misery and just the hell that humanity can create. And yet, if it is the case that we had to separate ourselves from the greater web of life to achieve something, what is it that we needed to achieve? And it may be that what we needed to achieve was the technological singularity. I don't know, but we're there, and we're very close to a lot of edges. So I'm letting that one run. Sorry, chickens outside, getting a bit frustrated. I apologize. Okay, so first concept that I want to put forward is that evolution is the process by which clouds of hydrogen gas give rise to giraffes, rose bushes, and people, or as I've rewritten it, the Big Bang gives rise to pears and parrots and people. Evolution occurs in any species under moments of intense pressure. That's what evolution is for. Pressure begins to be applied to whatever it is, whether it's a single cell organism in the soup, primordial soup, that's creating too much oxygen and becoming in danger of extinction because the oxygen is toxic and it needs to evolve, or it's people on the edge of all of the edges that we are. If we're not under pressure, we skate along doing what we've always done because it's comfortable. It's only when we're under pressure that we have to change. The present moment is the very definition of intense pressure. I don't need to belabor that. Jim told us all about it. We are facing so many cliff edges. The evolutionary one, the ecological one, the climate one, the political one, the cultural one. We could quite easily be about to hit what happens when we become resistant to antibiotics. That's the next big one. Forget pandemics. Antibiotic resistance is the thing that keeps most of us awake at night if we're involved in medicine in any way. We could have somebody slightly crazier than the recently passed president of the United States who thinks it's fun to press the big red button. We are at the edge of potential extinction. However, normal evolution takes a long time. It's really slow. We do not have time to go through the process of evolution where I have maybe a brain that's slightly less Paleolithic and I pass it on to my children, and that has some kind of evolutionary advantage, and they pass it on to their children and everybody else is wiped out. And 100 generations down the line, somebody has a brain that is slightly less Paleolithic. We haven't got time for that. We have to do this in our lifetimes. If you're listening to this, then we are the people. The time is now. So whatever we do, it's not evolution as we used to know it. So what can we do that is faster than what has got us here over it's 64 million years since the last mass extinction, but actually it's billions of years since the clouds of hydrogen gas began to coalesce to form planets. We are the end point of that, at least here, in this bit of real estate of the universe that we know. We are the end point of billions of years of evolution. And we haven't got time to go through the iterations anymore. So, park that for a moment. I am assuming also that you're all fairly familiar with systems theory, but just in case not, we're going to do a very accelerated run through systems theory. So systems theory says, at its most basic, and I am aware that there are complexities we're not going to get into, but just take this on board for a bit. There are two sets of things. There are complicated things and there are complex things. Complicated things tend to be made by people. So the computers through which we are communicating are complicated. Zoom is complicated. A Boeing 747 is complicated. I looked it up on Google. There are over 6,000 moving parts in a Boeing 747. They may not be moving. 6,000 parts. However, if somebody were to give you a lot of boxes, all carefully labeled, and an instructions sheet and a lot of time and the right tools, you could follow the instruction sheet, put the Boeing 747 together, and if you were a competent aircraft engineer, it would fly. We know that. There are Boeing 747s flying all the time. So it's predictable. And it's linear. You start at part number 1 and you bolt it to part number 2, and you bolt that to part number 3, and some amount of time later you bolt on part number 6,897, and the Boeing 747 is ready to fly. And when you fly it, it pretty much behaves linearly. When you turn the steering wheel, okay, maybe not. I'm a bit dodgy on my knowing of how Boeing 747s work, but you turn a wheel, it turns. You turn it the other way, it turns. It doesn't accelerate into a spin unless you've got things badly wrong. People like complicated things because they are predictable. We have a tendency to assume that everything is complicated and therefore linear and therefore predictable. This is one of the reasons why I've given up veterinary medicine and instead I'm learning homeopathy, which doesn't try to pretend things are complicated. Because if you treat people as complicated, you end up with a situation, as Zach Bush says, where 50 years ago, the incidence of childhood chronic illness was about 1.5% in the States, and now it's 56%. Because people aren't just lots of little bits that you bolt together and you fix one bit and make it go and the rest goes fine. People are complex. Most biological things are complex. A cell is complex. An organ composed of multitudes of cells all working together is complex. A human being is complex. A human society is hyper complex. Complex systems are not linear and they are wholly unpredictable. So the graph of the behavior of pretty much any complex system is that hockey stick curve. It's not a straight line. And the unpredictability is one of the keys. So humanity as a culture, as a global culture now, is a hyper complex system. Back in the old days of the Dunbar number, when we had 150 people as a maximum number of people in our tribe, even then it was hyper complex. But that was the amount that our little Paleolithic brains were designed to cope with. And what we have now is a super acceleration where 150 people might turn up to this Zoom call, and it's certainly not the sum total of the number of people that I connect to in any given day. So what I would like to propose is that we have stopped evolving physiologically. We stopped evolving physiologically pretty much when we stopped being forager hunters and became agrarian. At that point, that schism, where we decided that it was a fun thing to claim ownership of bits of land and separate ourselves off from the web of life. We'll talk a bit more about that later. What we did instead, though, was to evolve our capacity to communicate. So we went from whatever pre-human primates we were to early modern humans, and part of that evolution, if you read Greg Baden and believe it, and take on board all the Gene 2 stuff, but something happened so that our larynxes and pharynxes changed and we were able to produce consonants. because most animals speak in vowels. And once we've added in consonants, we've got much more complex language. I suspect we're going to find that the big cetaceans have equally complex language. We're very likely to find that things like bats have equally complex language. But definitely, we did evolve the capacity to speak to each other, to share concepts linearly down generations and horizontally across the tribe, and then between the tribes. And then we evolved the capacity to write, scratch things on bits of rock or bits of bark and pass them around and send them on boats and send them across the sea. And then our capacity to connect with each other grew that much more. And then we evolved the printing press and it grew that much more. And then we evolved the capacity for telegram and radio, and it evolved again and again. And then we invented the internet. And now we are at the point, as Jim said the other day, where the amount of data that we produce is doubling every 12 and a half minutes. More data is produced in the time that you and I are communicating together than the sum total of everything that was ever written down up until the formation of the internet. It's huge. So we are now what Jordan Hall calls self-organizing communication interfaces. And he had done a study at the back end of 2019, so pre-COVID, pre-lockdown, pre the Zoom explosion, where he calculated that we were at that point 1 order of magnitude more complex than we had been a decade before. And I don't know about you, but when lockdown first started for us, my connectivity online went up by several orders of magnitude. I might have had a Zoom call once a month, enough that I couldn't even remember how Zoom worked in between this time last year. And by the end of the first week of lockdown, I was having 3 or 4 Zoom calls a day. And the flow upon flow of emails that resulted from that. We are now massively more connected than we have ever been, which means that QAnon conspiracies can spread across the world. I don't know how many of you are following Don Kemby, the amazing Austrian who managed to download the entirety of Parler before it went offline, and is also watching the spread of QAnon. And it's viral in the truest sense. But that fact that viral spread happens means that other viral spread can happen. It doesn't all have to be QAnon taking limbic hijack of our Paleolithic minds. So I would like to introduce another concept that comes into complexity. Ilya Prigogine was a Nobel Prize winning physicist, middle of the last century, and he was looking at physical systems. But I think that complex systems, whether they're physical, physiological, or social, the same concepts apply. And the thing that he said that for me is the most interesting is that complex systems reach a point of maximal complexity, after which their timeline bifurcates. Every single time when they reach maximal complexity, they split. And there are 2 options. And option 1 is chaos and extinction. And option 2 is that we emerge to a new system. And the point about the new system is that it is wholly unpredictable. This is Daniel Schwakenberger. I am sure you're all familiar with him, one of the brightest minds of our current generation, who says emergence from complex systems is the closest thing to magic that science understands. And it's this utterly unpredictable nature of the emergence that I really want to look at. So the classic example and the metaphor that we use for emergence from complex systems is the caterpillar. If you came down from Alpha Centauri, arrived on Earth, managed to create communication with the small hairless bipeds that are busy screwing everything up, and decided to ask them about caterpillars because that was important to you, and they went, okay, it's a caterpillar, it's this little furry munching thing. I come from Scotland, caterpillars are furry. Most people I think are green. Anyway, it's a little munching thing that's wandering around destroying all the trees. And then it gets full and fat and it spins itself a cocoon. And then it dissolves. And it just becomes DNA soup in there. And in that DNA soup, little imaginal cells arise. And in the beginning, they are destroyed because they are seen to be other, they are alien. But they keep arising and they keep arising and they clump together to make little imaginal islands. And then the imaginal islands clump together to make imaginal organs. And then the imaginal organs form a butterfly. And I totally contend that if you came down from Alpha Centauri and you had never seen the caterpillar to chrysalis to butterfly, you would not predict that. You couldn't. If you didn't know enough about Earth system biology to give a good go, you would not predict that. The emergence from the complex system is not predictable. If it is predictable, it is not an emergence from the system. It's just painting the wheels on the bus a different color. And this is where we get back to the Einsteinian quote, which I have remorphed a little bit to: no problem is solved from the mindset that created it. That's my short version. No problem is solved from the mindset that created it. If we are going to emerge from the complex system of now, we need to set the conditions for that emergence, but we cannot predict where we're going, or it's not emergence. So, given all of that, we bring all that together. At what point do we, as humanity, reach maximal complexity? I feel that this has to be soon. And then what happens? Do we head for chaos and extinction, or do we emerge to a new system? And I don't know. I think each at the moment is possible. But where I get to is, if there is a possibility that we could get to the point of emergence to a new system, then I will put every ounce of my effort and energy into trying to make that happen. Because if I do nothing and we hit chaos and extinction, I will not be very proud of that. And I would like to feel that I've done something useful. So thinking about this, suppose the next evolutionary step is one of consciousness, not a physiological change going down the generations, but one that's of our consciousness, consciously chosen. We are choosing to evolve our consciousness. That's what conscious evolution is for me. So, one, can we do it? If not, why not? And what's the worst that could happen if we tried? If so, how? How actually are we going to make that happen? So this is not, conscious evolution is not my idea. It's been around for a while. There are whole corners of the internet devoted to this. And so I got to, okay, let's have a look at this. And I'll explain a little bit in a moment about how I got there. How are we going to do this? And I got a lot of rabbit holes. And most of the rabbit holes were, okay, everybody just needs to meditate a lot more. A few hundred hours more meditation on the part of everyone on the planet, and we'll be fine. Because then we'll all know about peace and love, and we won't fall into the QAnon traps, and we'll maybe upgrade our Paleolithic emotional limbic systems a little bit to something that's at the very least medieval, possibly even transcends that. Or an alternative was, we just have to think, we just have to produce bigger ideas, better ideas. We have to think our way out of the current problem to how we want the world to be if it could be better. Think a lot, produce concept papers, white papers, distribute them, get everybody to understand, then we're cool. And the third version was we're just going to implant nanochips in our brains and everything will be fine. And if you still think that, I highly recommend that you listen to Sam Harris's TED Talk on AI as soon as we finish this call. And then you go and look at what Elon Musk announced yesterday, because they've now got nanochips in monkeys, and he says it's fine, the monkey looks really happy. We're not going to go there today because it's too upsetting, frankly. And also, given the bit at the top about the technological singularity, I don't think the nanochips need us, to be honest. And I don't think any of these is the answer, because each of these starts with its premise that we, humanity, have the answers and can create them. Which, we'll go into why I don't think that's right before I get too excited about it. Okay, so I'm just going to tell you how I got to where we are now because I think it's useful at this point. This is our little blue dot floating in the blackness of space, as Jim mentioned earlier. So my spiritual practice is shamanic. And every winter solstice, I sit with the fire. I was for a long time a fire dreamer. That's how I came to write the Boudica series and various other things. And I sit with the fire and I process the year that's just gone, and I ask, what do you want of me for the year that is still to come? And this was winter solstice 2018, and I was feeling quite happy and quite smug because I had taken a group of dreaming students. So I teach what I call shamanic dreaming, which is, we can go into later, not time now. Anyway, I'd taken my original group of students all the way around the wheel. And they had transformed, really. These people were completely different. And we'd started off with hundreds, had started doing the foundation group 15 years before. And by the time we got all the way around, because people drop out, we had 9. So, you know, these 9 people had totally transformed. It was amazing. So I sit with the fire and go, bet you're impressed with that, eh? Not quite like that, but that was the basic gist. And 2 things happened. And the first was that whatever it is that makes these conversations was, no, really? Are you kidding me? 9 people every 15 years is not going to cut it. Really. It's fine. And you learned a lot. And it's jolly useful. And it's really good for those 9 people. But now you have to start teaching at scale. Really? Are you serious? Because I don't know how to teach shamanic stuff at scale. It's not safe. It really isn't. You know, it's either something you can learn over Zoom, or it's really, really ancient, really profound, really powerful practice that can only be passed person to person with extreme care, and it can't be both. So, so that was a bit disconcerting, and I had an image of me on a stage in the States speaking to large numbers of people, which did weird things to my head because I don't fly anymore. Or I gave up flying a very long time ago. Because carbon, bad. And then the second image was of the blue pearl floating in the blackness of space. And all around it were very, very, very fine filaments of light. And it was nighttime then, it was about midnight, so this was moonlight. When I see it in daytime, it's sunlight, but light. Very, very complex web, crossing all these little filaments, crossing, bunching, crossing. And at every crossing point was a node of consciousness. And some of those were people, but most of them weren't. They were trees and rivers and rocks and mountains and red kites and badgers and mycelial networks under the earth and volcanoes. And I sat with that for a long time. And it took most of 2018 to bring those 2 together and to work out what was wanted. And what was wanted was what we set up as accidental cause, but really it was the path to conscious evolution. It was, how are we going to bring ourselves to that point of emergence? And what does it mean in the context of that vision? So the absolute baseline premise of all of this, and it is because my spiritual practice is shamanic, all of my life, from when I was about 9 years old, has been trying to find clear, clean, coherent ways to ask of the gods of this land, what do you want of me? And then to respond to the answer. And when I began to explore conscious evolution, and I went up the hill and I sat and asked, what seems very clear to me is we don't have the answers, and we don't have to have the answers. We have to be. We have to get to the point where each of us is being what only we can be in the best way that we can be, so that each of us can stand joined in that web of life, taking our place, confident that we are the right person in the right place at the right time, and able to ask the question, what do you want of me, of the rest of the web of life, of which we are an integral part, and then do whatever is asked of us in real time. And that means we don't have to write white papers and plan stuff out. We don't even have to spend hundreds of hours meditating unless that's what brings us to being the best of ourselves. We just have to make ourselves available. So, having got to that, I then was listening to You Have to Teach at Scale. I did end up in the States. I did end up teaching at scale quite soon after that vision. In fact, 3 days after that vision, I got an email from someone which basically said, okay, there's 50 of us, there's one of you. So either 50 of us fly from the US to the UK, or one of you fly from the UK to the US. Which do you want it to be? And if I hadn't had the vision, I would have just shut that one down. But I did go to the States. And in the process of learning how to find something that I could teach at scale that was going to help us move towards whatever point it is that we need to get to create the emergence to a new system, I want ordinary people to be able to do this, because I live an incredibly privileged life. I live in a small building, I write books, I write television scripts. I can spend half a day meditating if that's what I want to do. I don't have kids. I don't have a day job that I hate that drags all my energy out. I can be broadly outside of the sea of the current system. But we need everyone on this. I think we need a critical mass, actually, but I don't know what that critical mass is. Gurdjieff said 200 fully enlightened people will transform the planet, but he doesn't say where he got the number from, and he doesn't really define what fully enlightened is. So I'm going to let that one go. We need a critical mass of people, I think, to be at the edge of wherever our edge is, totally connected to the web of life, and ready, and asking, what do you want of me? And then what emerges is unpredictable. That's the point. So what I did was I created these 4 steps: reawakening into connection, growing into coherence, asking for help, and letting go. We're about to go through those quite quickly because I'm aware time is moving on. So reawakening into connection. It is my contention, my absolute contention, that humanity evolved in connection with the web of life. That we emerged as humans in context with the living world, with the more than human world. We cut ourselves off from that around the time of the agrarian revolution. But that, in human evolutionary terms, is a very short time ago. And I don't have kids, but my partner has grandchildren, and I've watched them from a safe distance. And it seems to me that children are born today as little hunter-gatherers, forager hunters, whatever you want to call them. I have heard it said, and I'm kind of prepared to take it on board, that if you were to swap a child born today with one born 50,000 years ago, that each would grow in its new niche perfectly fine. I think that doesn't take into account quite a lot of epigenetics, but let's let that one go. We are still broadly Paleolithic. We haven't evolved that much. We have got the capacity to reconnect with the web of life. We really do. And to have the humility to say, I don't have the answers, but I believe that the whole of the web of life, the consciousness that is the web of life on this planet, that does have the answers. I just need to take my part, connected to it. So how can we do that? How can we reconnect? And a lot of creating accidental gods has been me sitting up the hill asking that question day after day after day. How do I teach people how to do this? Because I've spent 20 years teaching contemporary shamanic stuff and finding the holes, really, in my own capacity to teach, in people's capacity to learn stuff in a weekend, in their capacity to have time when they go back to ordinary life. So I think we need to it takes time. We can't do this overnight. We can't do it by watching a Zoom call. We can't do it by binge watching a bit of Netflix. We can't even do it by 5 minutes of meditating a day. But we can do it by giving the time to really connect. And so we've set up a program. We connect to the elements first, because that's what I was given: water, then fire, then earth, then air, and spend 8 weeks at a time or longer. Most of the students who started seem to be taking longer, but that's because they get into it and they want to do that. And once we've connected to the building blocks of life, then we can extend that out. Because what we're aiming for, we'll get to that in a minute, we'll get to where we're aiming. What we want to do is get to a point, everybody knows that we need to connect to the natural world. But knowing it and doing it are different. And in all of the neuropsychology, I can get very geeky, I'm not going to. We can do that later if you want. Neurophysiology is just one of my favorite things. There's a difference between declarative and performative concepts. Declarative is, I know it's a good idea to meditate. I know it drops my blood pressure. I know it changes me from a dopamine to a serotonin meshwork in my brain. I know it's a good idea to go out for walks in the more than human world, to sit with a tree, to sit by a river. I know all this. And I've downloaded half a dozen meditation apps, and I've read a couple of books, and I've watched some YouTubes, and I really know it. And knowing it is not the same as doing it. Knowing it is declarative, and we need to know it because that gives us the incentive to do it. But downloading another app isn't the same as doing what we need to do, the performative knowledge of actually sitting and meditating, of actually going out and spending time under the blackthorns, of actually going and immersing in a river. We need to do these things. We need to move from the declarative, it's a really cool idea, to I spend time doing this every day because it really matters to me. So I set my primary goal as, can I reach the single mother working with 3 kids under the age of 10? And I'm still working on that because lockdown happened about 2 months after we launched. All the way through 2019, I was going up the hill, coming down, going, okay, we need to do this, we need to do this. My beloved wife is the tech person in the family, and she's done all the design and made it all happen. And through the fall of that year, I would come down and go, we need to do this, and she'd be going, no, we can't get that done. We just can't do that in time for, you want to launch at the winter solstice, it's not going to happen. Let's just launch at the spring equinox, or even Imbolc, which is the 2nd of February for us. Forget groundhogs, Imbolc. And I would go there and go, spring equinox, and the gods were going, no, winter solstice, or just, it has to be the winter solstice. And I would come back down the hill and go, I am so sorry. I don't know why, but it has to be the winter solstice. Can we do this? And we did. And we had just got enough people to get going to find some of the holes of me asking too much of people before lockdown happened. And we needed that time. We really, really needed that time. And lockdown has made a huge difference in the capacity of people to take time. But it also meant that the single mother with 3 kids under the age of 10 is now homeschooling 3 kids under the age of 10. So we're still working on how can we reach ordinary people who are caught up in the mess of predatory neoliberal capitalism. It's a work in progress. Second part, growing into coherence. This is the 100 hours of meditation extra per year, per person. This is about us getting to grips with how we tick, with the Paleolithic emotions and the very, very modern mind. Understanding ourselves. I did a podcast recently. Podcasting is the best thing the world has ever done. I love it. And I recorded one that went out this morning, in fact, with a woman who taught mindfulness to the people, the civil servants in the Welsh government. Because the Welsh government, I think alone of anywhere on the planet, has written into its constitution that it has to, every department has to take account of the impact on future generations in making any decision. And she went in and she didn't say, I'm going to teach you mindfulness. She didn't say, I'm going to teach you compassion and empathy. She said, I'm going to teach you how your minds work so that you can do your jobs better. And in the review down the line, she had this guy turn up who said that his nickname was the Rottweiler, and that he thought it was his job to go into any part of his department and shout at people until they did what they were told, on the basis that everybody thought like he did. Therefore, if they weren't doing what he told them, it was because they were lazy and they just needed to be shouted at more. These things happen in government, certainly in the UK. And then she taught him how his mind worked and how other people's minds worked And in the process of learning mindfulness, he learned compassion and empathy and still wasn't told that that's what was happening. And he came in the feedback later and he said, I don't need to shout at people. Oh, what my job now, I realize, is to listen to people and find out how they can do their jobs better and then make that happen. And it's possible. It is possible. We can reach people. We have to be careful about the framing. We have to be careful about the language. We have to be cognizant of other people's triggers and not trigger them for the sake of it. But we can do this. And for me, really, along with the reconnecting with the web of life, we have got to really get to the point where we can watch our own thoughts, watch our own triggering, have compassion for ourselves and empathy and compassion, because they are different for other people. And that also is a lifelong practice. And we just have to create the space and the systems for people to do that. And I am quite a long way along the spectrum, as I'm sure it's fairly obvious. So I like systems. So I'm setting up systems where you put stuff in your ear and I will tell you what to do today. Listen to this meditation. Go out and sit with this leaf for 5 minutes and then come back tomorrow and we'll do something different. Just because people need systems, I think. So where we are heading for with this is that capacity to take our place in the web of life and ask, what is it that you want of me? And hear answers that are clear, constructive, coherent, in the moment, in real time, with authenticity. This is the thing that 20 years of teaching shamanic practice taught me, is people project. And of course, people project. That's part of the Paleolithic mindset. But we have to get to the point where we're not projecting, where we can recognize when something that comes in is authentic, that it comes from the web of life and it isn't a mishmash of my ego, my hopes, and my fears, where it feels real, where I would trust it with my life and my sanity, and with the possibility of conscious evolution versus chaos and extinction. And that takes practice. So it's one of those things where it has to be action research in real time. The only way to get there is to test it, to go out and do it and test it and be honest with ourselves. And that's hard because we want results, and results are often our projections. So I'm not suggesting this is easy, but I am suggesting it is doable. And then this is something that Leslie said yesterday, the letting go. The last bit that I learned in that whole process of 2019 coming up to the winter solstice was taking the empty-handed leap into the void. I used to be terrified of the void. I fell in at one point in my shamanic process and thought I'd got lost and I wasn't ever going to find my way out. And of all the sometimes quite scary moments of my shamanic apprenticeship, that was the point where I thought I was going to die of fright, which sounds really trite in the middle of a Wednesday afternoon. And at the time, didn't feel like that. And at one point in my life, I went off and did a master's in economics at Schumacher College, which was great, 2016. And they taught us, Donella Meadows, 12 leverage points. And the second to top leverage point was to change the paradigm. And I thought I could do that. I'm a writer. I can go home. I can write television scripts. We can show people how the world could be if we got it right. Because nobody's going to go to a future that they can't see. If we can't map something out, then nobody will even try. We are not going to be able to map out the emergence from the complex system because it's unpredictable. But we can map a way to get in there that feels like everybody would want. But Donella Meadows' top leverage point is abandon all paradigms. And I ignored that for 3 years because I didn't understand what she was talking about. And then in the process of trying to work out what the visions meant last year, I understood that the last thing that we do as we're joining with the web of life, probably the most important, is to let go of everything that we believe to be true. Because no problem is solved from the mindset that created it. And if we hold on to our framing of how we think the world is and how we think the world can be, then we will hold it in that frame, because human intent is the single most powerful force on this planet. And we need to set our intents to be open-hearted, full-hearted, strong-hearted, clear-hearted, and not holding on to how we think the world should be. And that's hard. I am not suggesting that it's easy. I am practicing this every day, and it's hard. And I'm working out ways of teaching people how to do it. It's the last stage of our 6-stage process, and we're not there yet, but we're heading there. We'll see where we get to. Because the thing about it is, you have to even let go of the part of you that knows you have to let go. It's kind of circular. But it's the end point of every genuine spiritual path. It's that non-dual space. And there are lots of ways of getting there. And it's really important. But I think it's important that we do it when we are connected to the web of life, so that we can ask, what do you want of me? Hear the answers in real time, and know that we are the right person in the right place at the right time, able to respond. So there we are. That's it. How fast can we bring a critical mass of people to all those 4 steps? I don't know, but I am working on it, because for me at this moment, it's the single most important thing that I can do. If tomorrow I wake up and there's something more important and more useful, then I will do that. I'm also writing a film script, also doing the podcast, but they're all designed to get us to this. That's my other thing. How do we get us there? So I think this is the film script bit. How do we fire our collective imaginations so that we all want to do this? Even QAnon. It can't be impossible. I just offer you that because I think it's a happy thing. It's a stage before letting go of everything else. Whoever has mastered the most perspectives by the time she dies wins. I don't like the zero sum of winning and losing, but I like the idea of mastering the most perspectives. There we go. That's me done. I will stop sharing. I will endeavor to stop sharing. This is the interesting bit because I've lost my pointer. There we go. All right, we're back. I'm back. I'm pretty much done. Anyone who wants to ask any questions is welcome.
Thank you, Manda. Brilliantly conceived and delivered. Thank you very, very much. You can see when you, in a few minutes, you can look through the chats and see the enthusiasm with which people are receiving your comments around this very critical question. And let's just begin with the second to the last quote that you had, that whoever dies with the most perspectives wins. I actually love that. Because just so everybody knows that the original notion was whoever dies with the most toys wins.
Yes.
as a parody of our crass consumerism. And the reason why I like this, and I'd like to explore it more deeply, this is at the heart of Ken Wilber's integral theory, that truth is a many splendored thing. And as he puts it, nobody is ever completely wrong and nobody is ever completely right. And if you know his 4 quadrants, you know, there's personal knowing that is in our gut. You know you love your partner. It's not rational, but it's real. And it's a way that we can know. Then there's also a collective knowing. You know, we all drive down in England on the left side and most of the rest of the world on the right side. We have certain customs, norms, and procedures that are handed down over the generations that we simply know collectively, just like we know things individually. And then on the other side of the quadrants, you have, you know, the biochemistry, the scientific data. When you feel like you're in love, there's certain hormones that are being released in your brain and in your gut and so forth and so on. When you feel fear, there's a certain physiological, scientific aspect of that that can also be known.
Yep.
And then that in the lower right quadrant, you have governments, institutions, laws, whereby we also know. So whether it's personal or collective, more intuitive, custom design ways of knowing, or more scientifically empirical, governmental, institutional, there's other ways of knowing. And in integral theory, the challenge in part is to hold all these ways of knowing, because the more different ways of knowing you can embrace, the more widely your empathy and compassion can extend. And that is what Ken calls, as you no doubt well know, the world-centric, that we start out egocentric when we're little babies. We just know that we're hungry, we want to be fed, we cry if we don't, and we emerge to ethnocentric, where we learn that our family, our school, our community, our religious group is important, but we don't extend our compassion or identity beyond that. So whatever, I think what you're saying is whatever gets us into a world-centric embrace of the whole,
yes,
is what we're driving at. Is that a fair understanding of what you're seeking to communicate?
I think so. I find Ken Wilber a bit intellectual and heady. Part of my concept is we live in a. If we were to say that there's head mind, heart mind, and body mind, there is also spirit mind. But let's deal with head mind. I want people to be making their concepts and decisions from their heart mind. And for me, Wilber's a little bit head mindy, but yes, essentially, definitely, I think we need to be world centric, and we need to be world centric in a way that grants agency and allows there to be intelligence beyond humanity. It's that world centric, not just I grant agency and intelligence to QAnon and I'm endeavoring to see the world from their viewpoint, which I need to do and I'm very bad at, but the red kite is as important to me as my partner in terms of me questioning and hearing answers, that I need to become that node in the web. And I need it not just to be humanity. I think that's the real thing, is if we keep thinking that humanity has the answers, then I think we're sunk. Because we manifest, that's what got us here, really. And I would like to hope that we can stretch beyond it. But yes, world-centric, definitely world-centric.
Well, I think you're bringing in the seminal point, and that is our identity needs to extend beyond the human,
yes,
to the
yes,
larger ecology,
more than human world. Yes.
and what we've talked about so often on Humanity Rising, and understanding that we're not separate from nature. We are nature.
Yes.
You and I talking right now is nature, talking with itself in a wonderful dialogue of consciousness.
Yes, but I also want to bring in the tree outside so that we know that that tree is part of that.
Yes.
I think is the key thing. And I think what I find when people come to Accidental Gods is there's a lot of that declarative knowing. And there's much less so I go, okay, so now you, new student, go out and talk to the tree and tell me what it's saying. And that takes a while because we're not used to that. The indigenous peoples are. If you ask an indigenous person to do that, it would be effortless. And for us in the what Jonathan Haidt called the weird nations, the Western educated, industrial, rich democracies, it's hard, but it doesn't mean it's not possible. Yeah. I think that's the key. I want us to reach a point where what the tree and the red kite and the mountain have to say is every bit as important as what the person across the street has to say. But the person across the street is part of our community, and they really matter too.
I could not agree with you more. And I would just insert here that Ubiquity may be the first university anywhere in the world that has courses on how you engage in intelligent communication with other species. And
Yes.
one of my longings, which I haven't gotten to yet, but maybe will be the next big project beyond Humanity Rising, who knows, is to create an institute for interspecies communication.
Oh,
Because
yes.
I completely agree with you, Manda, that in my mind, the most important thing humanity can do today on planet Earth is to learn the language of nature.
Yeah.
Every single other species is communicating amongst themselves all the time.
Yes.
There's one species who's out of the conversation,
Yes.
and that's the human species.
And yet they're desperate to talk to us. That's
Yes.
the thing.
Yes.
They're all the time.
Yes.
It's happening
Yes.
all the time. Just once the
Yes.
doors open, it's yeah, they're all like, yes, finally you're listening. So yeah, brilliant. When you start that, please can I come, please?
Well, yeah, and I just we're running out of time, but everyone, I want to just flag this interspecies communication that Manda's drawing to our attention as of singular importance. But let me move on. We'll have another session on this another time where we dedicate a whole session just to interspecies communication, because it's so important. And in fact, we're having Rupert Sheldrake,
the
biologist, in a couple of weeks.
Brilliant.
As part of our ongoing celebration of Stan Groff. And then we're going to do a special session with him. And as you may know, he's done a lot of research, in fact, written several books on the communication between dogs and their owners. Where the owner makes a decision to come home, but she's 50 miles away. And as soon as she makes the decision, the dog wakes up and goes to the door and waits. It's an amazing thing that just imagine what the world would be like if we were apprised of what the trees and the bushes and the flowers and the bees and the birds were all saying. Just think of the good advice we would get.
Then the politics of the world would change, because we would be different. It would change everything that we do and have done. We couldn't then get in a car and pour fossil fuels out, or consume plastic and throw it away. It just wouldn't happen. So yes, definitely. Should we look at the chat?
Yes, well, I've been
I'm just going to put a link to the if anyone's.
But as we bring this to a close, Amanda, I'd like to ask you to comment on, you've given us a panoply of techniques to engage in the reawakening of our consciousness. And as you view the world now, what would be your suggestion to anyone wondering, sort of, where do I start? What is the initial act of reawakening? What would that be for you?
Well, you could come to Accidental Gods and sign up. That would be nice. But seriously, go outside. Go out into whatever is the wildest place you can readily reach. And connect. Actually put the time into connecting with whatever there catches your eye. If it's a rock on the ground, or a blade of grass, or a particular branch on a tree, or some water, or a mountain, whatever it is that catches your eye, just give it time. Give it your time and your attention. And ask it, what can I do for you? And no, you have to know that asking it is not committing to do it. That's really important. Just because you ask doesn't mean you have to do it. If the rock says, I want you to get up every morning at 4:30 and meditate for 2 hours, and you go, actually I can't, not sure I'm ready for that, that's okay. You don't, by asking, you don't have to do it. If you say you're going to do it, then you have to do it. But just go and just connect. Open your heart space. Do whatever it takes. Do the meditation that Jim so beautifully does at the beginning. Find your heart space, open it, and wait, and see what arises.
I think that's beautiful. And I think many people would agree with you. The one thing we can all do is get out into nature.
Yeah.
In a spirit of inquiry, in a spirit of gratitude.
Yeah.
And I've been implementing that practice myself. There's a hill not far from the house called Red Hill, where I am in San Anselmo in Marin County in California. And every day or so, I do a little power walk up the hill to work my cardiovascular and take in the scenery. And at the very top of the hill, there's a clump of rocks, and coming out of the rocks is a beautiful tree, a little oak tree.
Wow.
And I've taken to going all the way up, and I used to just sort of rest and by the rocks. And then I thought, why don't I start hugging the tree? Yes. And just give it a nice hug and tell it I love it, kiss the bark, and just say yes to the tree. And I have to tell you, Manda, when I get up some days, I can hardly wait to get up that hill. And it's now not about the walk, it's about hugging the tree.
Yeah, I believe you. I do. That's fantastic. That is so glorious. There you go. Yeah. Yeah. And are you dreaming about it yet? Do you follow your dreams? Because I think the tree will start to talk to you, because that would be the next stage, is dream to the tree.
I haven't had the dream yet, but I've fallen in love with the tree.
Yeah, you have.
It's done my life and my health and my sense of well-being a lot of good, knowing that I'm in love with the tree.
Yeah. Yes. Wonderful. That is so good. Okay, guys, everybody just needs to go out and fall in love with a tree. That'll be
that would be a good place to start.
That'd be a really good place to start.
Yes. And by the way, as Manda, we could do a whole session on trees. The trees are the holders of memory.
Yeah.
They are very important parts of the overall living, intelligent, caring ecology of our planet.
Yeah.
And they may look very different from us, but they are an extension of us. And it's worth just commenting, we breathe out carbon dioxide, they breathe it in, and they breathe out oxygen, we breathe it in. So our symbiotic relationship with the trees is with every breath we take.
And every drop of rain. The trees, this little bacteria come out of the sporules on the leaves, and rain coalesces. If the trees weren't there, there would be no rain, which is also amazing. Yeah, we could do on trees, but we could do on rocks as well. Rocks hold ancient wisdom. Just getting to know a rock, a stone that you can hold. I've got one. I've been working with this stone for nearly 30 years now, and it's a river stone, and I love it in the way you love your tree. I have trees that I love too, but I really love this stone. And I sleep with it under my pillow sometimes, and it sits here, a little bit of an altar there. And yeah, there's so much in the world once we begin to connect.
Beautiful.
So much that we can connect to. I saw somebody went down, somebody asked about the Western educated industrial rich democracies. That's from Jonathan Haidt.
Yeah.
I just saw it go past. Guys, I saw that in the chat. There's so much in the chat that I haven't looked at, but I saw that one go past. I thought I better connect to it.
Well, good. Well, listen, thank you, Manda, for this splendid session.
Thank you for inviting me. It's lovely.
We're going to have Manda back, by the way. She's written, as I mentioned earlier, a splendid book on Boudica, the pre-Roman queen of Britain. That is an extraordinary story. And when we were talking about it, she mentioned that she also has done a lot of research on Joan of Arc. So we're going to schedule another session with Manda on understanding the two extraordinary women and how we can be inspired by their lives. Boudica, Queen of Britain, and Joan of Arc. So thank you so much, Manda. And then tomorrow, everyone, we're going to hear from Carolyn Baker. She's the author of, probably a dozen books on navigating through chaos, how we come to terms with a world that is in apocalyptic upheaval. And she's going to be speaking to us about how we create islands of sanity in the rising sea of chaos all around us. So we're going to continue this discussion about how we change consciousness given the urgency of our time so that we can take all the shadow, all the darkness, all the sludge of human turpitude and rework it into something that will redeem and lead us to a much more abundant future. But what we've seen from Manda today is that the gateway to that is through nature. So your homework assignment, which is the first time I've assigned homework here on Humanity Rising, but as a college professor, I can't help myself sometimes, is to go out today and hug a tree. Hug a rock.
Yes.
With the intention of establishing a personal relationship. And the communion and the communication will begin. So thank you, everyone. We'll see you again tomorrow here on Humanity Rising, same time, same station, 5 o'clock p.m. Central European Time here on Zoom. Manda, brilliant. Thank you. And everybody's welcome now to the after session chat. You'll find the link in your the chat box. So we'll see you on the other side, those of you who can join us. Bye, everyone. See you tomorrow.
Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day. Are you guys still there? Where's the chat link?